My name is Emily, and this story begins long before the inheritance meeting that would change everything. I grew up in a small town in Ohio with my dad. He was my rock, my safe place, and the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. My mom passed away when I was very young, so for as long as I can remember, it was just the two of us. Dad worked hard to provide for me, and even though we didn't have much, he always made sure I felt loved and supported. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it felt complete. That changed when Dad remarried. I was around 13 when he introduced me to Lisa, the woman who would later become my stepmom. At first, I wanted to be open-minded. Dad looked happy with her, and all I wanted was to see him smile again. But deep down, I noticed the little ways she treated me differently. She never said anything cruel outright in those early days, but there was this constant sense that I didn't quite belong. It was in her tone when she said my name, in the way she rolled her eyes at my teenage mistakes, and in the small sighs whenever Dad gave me attention. It was subtle, but I felt it, and over the years it grew heavier. As time went on, Lisa made her presence more permanent in our home. She redecorated, she changed routines, and she made decisions like she had always been there. For Dad, this probably seemed normal, maybe even comforting. But for me, it felt like my space was shrinking. I wasn't openly rebellious or rude, but I carried a quiet resentment, one I never dared to express because I didn't want to put Dad in the middle. He loved us both, and I didn't want to make him choose. But Lisa, she knew how to play her role. In front of Dad, she acted supportive, smiling at me, pretending she cared. When he wasn't around, the mask slipped. She would make comments about how ungrateful I was, how I should be more like her side of the family, or how Dad spoiled me too much. I remember one night when Dad worked late and she told me, once you grow up, your dad won't be able to protect you anymore. You'll see the real world isn't so easy. I was only 15, and those words stuck to me like glue. Despite all this, Dad and I stayed close. He had this way of looking at me that made me feel safe, like no matter what, he was in my corner. He never said much about Lisa's behavior. Maybe he didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to see it, but he always encouraged me to focus on school, on building a future for myself. I think he knew I carried a quiet pain, and he tried to remind me of my worth in his own way. When I went to college, I remember him hugging me tight and whispering, "Don't let anyone tell you who you are. You're strong, Em." Those words mattered more than he knew. Over the years, I built my life step by step. I graduated, got my first job, and even though I wasn't making a fortune, I was proud of myself. Dad was proud too. Every phone call ended with him saying he loved me, and I knew he meant it. Meanwhile, Lisa's presence never faded. If anything, she grew more confident, more entitled. She acted like she had always been the center of Dad's life and I was just a visitor passing through. Family gatherings were always awkward. She would introduce her relatives like they were the core of the family and glance at me as if I were an outsider. Sometimes I would hear her laughing with her friends, saying things like, "Well, Emily will be fine on her own. She doesn't really need much from us." I never said anything to Dad about it. Part of me didn't want to burden him, and another part of me thought he probably wouldn't believe how deep her disdain went. Then came the hardest season of my life. Dad's health began to decline. It was slow at first, just little things, fatigue, aches, more doctor visits than usual. But within a year, it became clear he was fighting something serious. Watching the strongest man I knew fade before my eyes was unbearable. Lisa put on her role of caretaker, always fussing over him, always making sure she looked like the devoted wife. And to be fair, she did take care of him in those moments, but there was still that edge whenever it came to me. She would say things like, "Your dad needs peace. Maybe you should stay away for a while, Emily." Those words broke me, but I refused to leave his side completely. I visited as often as I could, sitting by his bed, holding his hand, and cherishing the quiet moments. When Dad finally passed, my world collapsed. I felt like a piece of me had been ripped away. The funeral was a blur. People hugged me, told me to stay strong, but nothing sank in. Lisa stood beside me like the grieving widow, soaking up the sympathy while I stood there feeling invisible. But even in my grief, I remembered something Dad once said to me: trust the truth. It always finds its way out. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but those words replayed in my mind as I struggled to navigate the days after his death. It wasn't long before the lawyer contacted us about the inheritance meeting. I hadn't thought about money or property. I was still drowning in loss. But Lisa seemed eager, almost too eager. She called me one morning and said with a hint of amusement in her voice, "Well, I guess we'll see what your father really left behind." I could hear the smirk in her tone, and my stomach tightened. That was the first time I realized this meeting wouldn't just be about paperwork. It would be about everything she had ever thought of me, and everything Dad had thought of both of us. And that's how the stage was set. I was about to walk into a room where the truth would finally come out. The morning of the inheritance meeting, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple but neat, because I wanted to walk in with dignity, no matter what happened. As I drove to the lawyer's office, I could feel my heart pounding. Every stoplight felt like it lasted forever, and my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. When I finally pulled up, I took a deep breath and told myself, no matter what she says, you belong here. You are his daughter. Inside the office, the air felt heavy. The walls were lined with dark wooden shelves and rows of books, and everything smelled faintly of leather and old paper. A large table sat in the center, polished to a shine, and at the head of it was Mr. Thompson, my dad's lawyer. He looked up when I entered and gave me a gentle nod, one that seemed to say he knew this wouldn't be easy. Lisa was already there. She sat confidently, her hands folded on the table, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The moment her eyes met mine, I saw it, that spark of amusement, like she already knew how this would go. Her sister sat beside her, and they whispered something to each other, both of them chuckling softly, as if sharing an inside joke. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but forced myself to sit tall in the chair opposite them. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and began explaining the purpose of the meeting, laying out folders and papers neatly in front of him. He spoke calmly, outlining how my father's estate would be handled, but I barely heard the words at first. My focus kept drifting to Lisa, who leaned back in her chair, her smile growing wider with every sentence. At one point, she let out a light laugh, shaking her head as if this whole process was just a formality for her benefit. Then she looked straight at me and said almost casually, "I hope you didn't expect too much, Emily. Your dad always wanted to make sure I was taken care of." Her words hit me like a slap. My jaw tightened, but I stayed silent. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Instead, I fixed my eyes on Mr. Thompson, reminding myself that this wasn't over. He continued reading, listing small personal items and sentimental things first. Some went to Lisa, some to me, nothing major yet. The tension in the room grew thicker with every word. Lisa leaned closer to her sister and whispered something I couldn't hear, then laughed again, covering her mouth with delicate fingers. Finally, the moment shifted. Mr. Thompson's tone became more deliberate as he pulled out another document. "Now," he said, "we will discuss the division of major assets." The room went silent. Lisa straightened in her chair, clearly ready for her grand moment. She even shot me a sideways glance, a smirk dancing across her lips, as if she could already taste victory. My palms grew sweaty, and my breath caught in my throat. This was it, the moment everything would be revealed. As Mr. Thompson began to read, Lisa's confidence only grew. The first items mentioned were a couple of shared accounts and one of the smaller properties. Those indeed were left to her. She nodded proudly, tilting her chin higher, and whispered, "Of course," under her breath. She even laughed softly, turning to me and saying, "See, I told you." Her words stung, but I sat frozen, waiting, listening, holding on to the hope that my dad had seen me, had remembered me in a way that mattered. Mr. Thompson paused for a moment, adjusting his glasses before moving on to the next part. The air in the room shifted again, heavier now. Lisa's smile never faded, but I noticed her tapping her fingers impatiently on the table. She was so sure this was hers, so sure she had won. I swallowed hard, bracing myself for whatever came next. And then, in the middle of her smug laughter, Mr. Thompson began to read something that made her lean forward, her smile faltering ever so slightly. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know yet what was coming, but I could feel it in the air. The tide was about to turn, and for the first time that day, it wasn't her laughter that filled the room. It was silence. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, and the sound echoed through the room. He glanced at the papers in front of him, and then looked directly at me before continuing. According to your father's wishes, he said, his voice steady, the majority of his assets, including his investments, savings, and real estate, will be transferred to his daughter Emily. For a second I thought I had misheard him. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. My heart skipped, then raced, and I could feel the blood rushing to my face. I stared at him, stunned, trying to process what he had just said. And then I looked at Lisa. Her smile had frozen in place, her eyes wide, her mouth opening just slightly, as if she was about to argue, but couldn't find the words. The silence was so sharp it almost hurt my ears. Even her sister, who had been whispering smugly a few minutes earlier, sat rigid, eyes darting between us, unsure of what to do. Mr. Thompson continued reading, outlining the details: the family home, several rental properties, accounts Dad had carefully built over years of work, all placed in my name. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if he wanted every word to sink in. And sink in they did. Lisa's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the table, her carefully polished nails digging into the wood. I wanted to smile, but I didn't. Instead, I sat still, my breath shaky, my mind flashing back to all the times she had mocked me, dismissed me, acted as though I was invisible. I remembered the laughter in her voice just moments ago, and now that laughter was gone. In its place was silence, a silence so loud it felt like victory. Your father was very clear about his intentions, Mr. Thompson added, glancing at Lisa as if he anticipated an outburst. He wanted to ensure that his daughter was provided for. While provisions have been made for his wife, the significant assets were directed toward Emily. His words cut through the room, leaving no space for misinterpretation. Lisa finally found her voice, though it trembled. This must be some kind of mistake, she stammered. Her confident tone was gone, replaced by disbelief. He loved me. He said he wanted me secure. How could he? She stopped herself, her eyes narrowing as she turned to glare at me, as if I had orchestrated this somehow. I held her gaze, not with anger, but with something steadier. For once I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the unwanted outsider. I felt seen. I felt like my dad had reached out from beyond and wrapped me in his protection one last time. Mr. Thompson calmly slid another paper across the table. These are your father's handwritten notes confirming his choices. He was specific. He expressed deep love for both of you, but he made it clear that Emily was to inherit the majority of his estate. Lisa's hand shook as she picked up the paper, scanning it quickly, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't say anything this time. She couldn't. Tears welled in my eyes, not from the money, not from the property, but from the validation. My dad had thought of me. He had remembered me, valued me, loved me enough to make sure I was cared for. That truth mattered more than any number written on a page. I took a deep breath and let the weight of it settle over me. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was proof that my dad had never forgotten who I was to him. Across the table, Lisa sat frozen. The confidence she had carried into the room had crumbled, and for the first time since I had known her, she had no words. No clever remark, no dismissive laugh, no smug smile. Just silence. And in that silence, I felt stronger than ever, Mr. Thompson wrapped up the formalities, explaining the next steps in paperwork. His voice faded into the background as my thoughts turned inward. I imagined Dad smiling at me, proud, telling me once again not to let anyone define my worth. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about winning or beating Lisa. It was about finally realizing that I was never invisible to him. He had always seen me, even when she tried to erase me. When the meeting ended, I stood up slowly, my legs trembling but steady enough to carry me. Lisa remained seated, staring blankly at the table, her face pale. I walked past her without a word. For years she had taken pleasure in making me feel small. But now the truth had spoken louder than her laughter ever could. And for the first time, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth had done it for me. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, the sunlight felt different on my skin. It was warm, grounding, almost like my dad himself was wrapping me in comfort. My chest still ached with grief, but beneath it was something new, something steady relief, maybe even pride. I paused on the sidewalk, closed my eyes for a moment, and let myself breathe. The weight of Lisa's smirk, her laughter, her dismissive words, they all seemed to dissolve in that single moment. For years I had carried them like heavy stones, but now they felt lighter, almost meaningless. That night when I got home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and just stared at the papers Mr. Thompson had given me. They weren't just documents. They were proof of my dad's love. Every signature, every note, every detail showed that he had thought carefully about me, about my future. Tears blurred my eyes as I ran my fingers over his handwriting. I whispered quietly, "Thank you, Dad. I hear you. I see you." But of course the story didn't end neatly there. A few days later, Lisa called me. Her voice was sharp, no longer smug, but bitter. "You think this makes you better than me," she snapped. "He was my husband. I took care of him. I deserve more than this." I listened calm while she vented, blaming me, blaming the lawyer, even blaming Dad's illness. Part of me wanted to argue, to remind her of all the ways she had belittled me, but I didn't. I just said, "This was Dad's choice. I didn't take anything from you. He gave it to me." My voice didn't shake this time. She didn't like that. She hung up on me and the line went silent. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how the world around me seemed to shift. Some relatives reached out offering support and kindness I hadn't expected. Others, especially those closer to Lisa, pulled away. It hurt a little, but I realized I couldn't control their opinions. What mattered was that my dad had trusted me, and that trust meant more than approval from anyone else. Slowly, I began to use what he left me to build a life that honored him. I didn't rush out to buy anything extravagant. Instead, I paid off my student loans, set up a savings plan, and started looking at ways to invest wisely. Each step felt like carrying his legacy forward, like living in a way that would make him proud. But the real change wasn't financial, it was inside me. For so long, I had lived with this shadow of doubt, questioning whether I was enough, whether I belonged. Lisa's words had shaped too much of how I saw myself. That day in the lawyer's office, when the truth finally silenced her, it also silenced those doubts inside me. I began to see myself the way my dad had always seen me, capable, strong, and worthy. One evening, I drove past the old family home. I didn't go in, but I sat in the car and just looked at it. The windows glowed with the soft light of sunset, and I thought of all the memories held inside birthdays, holidays, nights where Dad and I laughed over pizza on the couch. My heart ached, but it was a good ache, one that reminded me love doesn't disappear even when someone does. I smiled through tears, whispering again, "I'll take care of it, Dad. Don't worry." The inheritance didn't erase the pain of losing him, and it didn't erase the years of tension with Lisa. But it gave me something stronger than either of those things. It gave me closure. It gave me proof that in his final days my dad's heart was still with me. And that truth, more than anything written on paper, was what set me free. A week after the meeting, I got a call from Mr. Thompson. His voice was calm, almost gentle, when he said, "Emily, there's something else your father left for you. A letter. He asked me to give it to you privately after everything was settled." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened and tears pricked my eyes before I even had the envelope in my hands. Later that afternoon, I drove back to his office. He handed me a plain white envelope, my name written across the front in my dad's handwriting. Seeing those familiar letters, shaky but still his, made my heart ache. I thanked Mr. Thompson quietly and left, clutching it like something fragile and sacred. At home, I sat at the kitchen table, where I had cried over the inheritance papers just days before. The house was silent. I held the envelope for a long time, running my fingers across the ink, feeling the grooves of his pen strokes. Part of me was scared to open it. What if it broke me all over again? But then I thought of his voice, steady and loving, always telling me not to hide from the truth. So I opened it. The letter was only a few pages, but every word carried his voice. "My sweet Emily," it began, and just seeing those words made the tears spill down my cheeks. He wrote about memories from when I was little, how I used to climb onto his lap with my favorite book, how we laughed over burnt pancakes on Saturday mornings, how he watched me grow with pride, even when I doubted myself. Then his tone shifted, more serious, more deliberate. He wrote, "I know life hasn't been easy with the changes in our family. I know you've felt overlooked, and I regret not always stepping in the way I should have. But I want you to know I have always seen you. I have always loved you, and I trust you with what I built because I know you will honor it." By the time I reached that part, I was sobbing, clutching the letter against my chest. It felt like he was right there with me, whispering into my ear. He went on to explain that he left the inheritance to me, not to hurt anyone else, but to protect me. He knew I would use it wisely, that I wouldn't waste it, and that I would carry his values forward. "This isn't just money, Emily," he wrote. "This is years of my work, my sacrifices, and my dreams for you. I want you to feel safe. I want you to live boldly. I want you to know you were never second in my eyes. You are my daughter. Always." I read those lines over and over, letting them sink into the cracks of my heart, where doubt and insecurity had lived for so long. For years I had wondered if he really noticed the way Lisa treated me. Reading his words, I realized he had noticed. Maybe he hadn't said it out loud, maybe he didn't always confront it, but he knew. And in his own way, he had answered it, not with arguments, not with fights, but with love and trust. The letter ended with a message that felt like a blessing. Don't let anger guide you. Don't waste your life trying to prove anything to anyone. Just live and live well. That will be enough for me. I folded the pages carefully, placed them back in the envelope, and held it against my heart. For the first time since losing him, I didn't just feel grief, I felt peace. Over the next few days, I kept the letter close. Whenever doubt crept back in, whenever Lisa's bitter words echoed in my mind, I pulled it out and read it again. It became my anchor, my reminder that love doesn't fade when someone is gone. It lives in the choices they make, the words they leave behind, the way they shape your life, even after they're not there to hold your hand. That letter changed everything. The inheritance gave me security, but the letter gave me clarity. It wasn't about winning or proving Lisa wrong. It wasn't even about the assets themselves. It was about love, about recognition, about finally knowing without question that I was seen, valued, and cherished. And that truth meant more than anything else he could have given me. In the months that followed, I carried my dad's words with me like a compass. They reminded me not to let bitterness shape my choices. Yes, I had been mocked, underestimated, and treated unfairly, but in the end, the truth spoke louder than any insult. My dad's love and trust were stronger than all the years of doubt. I learned something important through this. Our worth is not defined by the way others see us. It's defined by the way we choose to stand even when we feel small. If you've ever been in a place where someone made you feel invisible, I hope my story reminds you that your value doesn't depend on their opinion. The truth has a way of coming out, even if it takes time. What matters is holding on to who you are and believing in your strength. That's what carried me through, and that's what my dad's final gift truly gave me: the freedom to step into my own life without fear, without apology. Looking back, this story wasn't really about money or property. It was about love, respect, and the quiet power of truth. I walked into that inheritance meeting feeling small, mocked, and unwanted. But I walked out knowing without a doubt that my dad had seen me, valued me, and trusted me. His letter reminded me that even when others try to dim your light, your worth doesn't disappear. The core message is simple: don't let anyone's cruelty define you. Hold on to your strength because the truth has a way of rising to the surface. My dad's last gift wasn't just security, it was freedom from doubt and the courage to live boldly. If you've ever been underestimated or made to feel invisible, I hope this story reminds you that you are enough just as you are. Let it inspire you to stand tall, honor your own worth, and trust that time will reveal what's real. And if this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where truth and love always find their voice.